Welcome to Module 9, Video 9.0.3, Deploying an Innovation Process. That's what the overall module is about. Just to begin, remind you, you've designed a whole new future state enterprise process management system, or a new enterprise-wide system implementation, or a new product development process, or whatever it happens to be. And now you're wanting to deploy it, to implement it. Now, I mainly focused on the product development process, but equally it could be an IT system that supports product development, supports your innovation enterprise that you're trying to foster. And I also talked about in the previous videos about the change agent. Now, you can go in as an external consultant, as a master change agent, so you're working with the C-level executives. You need a sponsorship from the CEO or the board, and certainly the COO, but you may be working at a vice presidential level because of the nature of the change. But usually, if it's enterprise-wide transformational change, it's usually at the COO level with a strong sponsorship by the chief executive. Now, you're not the only change agent, of course. They all have to become change agents. So you have to coach the CEO, the COO, the vice presidents. All of them have to become change agents within their company. I don't mean that they learn the skills where they do it in a professional capacity as a career. Most executives who are employees of corporations are highly specialized in that corporation's products. So if it's food products, they really know how that food production system works. They know what the markets are. They know the production and operations system. They know the financial budgeting of the company, the seasonality of the business. They know their competition and so on and so forth. That's what they're there to do. They're not really there to work as constant change agents. In fact, they're there to sort of manage the steady state. But the idea is to bring external change experts that can help them through it and coach them through it, but then teach them the intricacies of day-to-day change management techniques and systems. And that's what this lecture here is about. How do you build change agents? Objectives. To understand why it is difficult to change an organization. We've been through this, so I will not dwell on that. To explore what a change agent is and how a change agent implements change, to provide an approach and tools to overcome resistance. I'm going to tell you that in APS 1013, I think it's around about module 11 or 12, I did into this in depth, where you're looking at socio-political systems and socio-political techniques in order to manage and implement change. Now, on the APS 1013, you're working with an external company, so you actually are exposed to people and so on. You're not implementing, obviously, over 13 weeks. All you're doing is doing a study and coming up with a way forward. Whether they choose to implement that or not is up to them. And maybe they'll hire you to help implement it. Then you'll soon get into the politics of it. So I really talk about the social politics aspect of change in APS 1013, the Applied Innovation class, from a theoretical and academic point of view. The only way you get to use it is actually get the job and use it in industry. As simple as that. But at least you get exposure. Table of contents, the change agent role, why people resist, working out what you want to do, identifying and engaging influential people, persuading people to change, and so on. Again, that number 5, I think I'll stop there because I picked that up in APS 1013. What's the role of a change agent? People hire agents to make a difference. They face ambiguity or complexity. So you get 17, 18 plants, all in different locations, different geographies, different cultures, different products, but they're all part of an overall, let's say, electrical equipment company in the energy business. They need to change or unlearn, and then unlearn old habits and relearn new habits. They face risks that need to be managed. Every company, every division has a risk of going out of business, especially with hyper competition. They wish to resolve conflict or gain influence. And they need the transient expertise to solve a problem. Transient meaning an external person comes in for a few months or a few years and then leaves. Look, my relationships in my work in management consulting, I've had 14, a maximum of about 14 years, 15 years with a company. I still have a connection with them. But over the 15 years, I did regular engagements to help scale and build that company, or scale it with the owner. But not in the last 5 years. And others, it's been 7 years, and many of those aerospace projects were 7 years, so they were long term. But there have been others which have only been a few months, where you go in and maybe you do a study and give them a blueprint for what they should do. Whether they do it or not is up to them. But typical change, you've got a long-term relationship. You can be brought in to help resolve conflict. That's a short-term intervention. They need transient expertise, okay. They wish to expand, evolve, new opportunities, okay. The role, this is another important part, the role of a change agent changes over time. At the very beginning, you're like a teacher. You're teaching them, you're coaching them on, well, you're teaching them, not coaching, you're teaching them what has to be done. So you're going in as a content consultant, and you're assessing what they've done, and you're saying, here's all the things that you did wrong, here's what you've done right, and here's what you need to do to go forward. And then you can leave. They can do it themselves. So that's where you're bringing in expertise, giving them a report and walking out. Often that was a traditional consulting. So that's really understand what is going on. Now, that could finish it. That's it. Or, and then tell them what to do. And then you can help coach them to do it, so then you can teach them. And then as they implement it, you can be coaching and then facilitating the implementation process. And as you coach one-on-one, then you can coach a whole team, and then you move into a more facilitator role. So while you're coaching, you might be at the head of the room. You might be chairing the meetings at the beginning. But then you make a change, the role changes, and you've already been coaching a leader of the team, and that leader sits, and you then go to the side. And then you don't just sit at the table, you sit at the edge of the wall, around it. So for example, in very big companies where there's very senior executives and they have a steering committee meeting, the executives sit around the table, and all the managers involved sit around the edge as observers. Now this is by design, because the decision makers are at the conference room table, and the facilitators, or the ones that are implementing, are observing it all around, so it improves the communications process. Often the change agent, who might be coaching the CEO, does not want to sit at the table with the executives, because they do not want to be perceived as having the power or any authority, because they don't have it. They may have it in an influential way. So the best way to distance yourself from that image is to sit around the wall. So then you start engaging after you connect, you do a study, and then demonstrate and build ownership to overcome resistance. That's the coaching. And then roll out. Implementation, accountability without authority. When you're a master change agent, you don't have authority. You have unwritten authority, you have hidden authority from the CEO. So vice presidents know. The CEO's brought you in to help them. And if they start messing you about, that CEO, she's not going to be too pleased. So you're actually using the authority of the CEO, but you have to use it very, very carefully, very subtly. The hint of arrogance, or hammer approach, or dictatorial approach, your history. Because the whole team could rise up against you, and the CEO will have they're not going to fire their whole team because of you. That's for sure, because of the master change agent. Plus, you've demonstrated that your skills are not up to power for the subtle changes that need to be made. Why people resist. This is just a little leverage thing here. It shows you this was a real picture I showed for aerospace teams, integrated project teams, integrated product teams. And they actually were on board in this particular time with this particular change, and then a few other supporters, but the mass of the employees were against this particular change, and they were still focused on internal focus, slow to change, conservative, rule bound. I want to do what the rules, what the old functional. This is what I do in my department. The rewards for rewards for the old habits, poor communications. The new world, open communications, reward for performance, innovative thinking, meaning change, open to change, fast to react, customer focused. I've shown this 100 times. I think Machiavelli, 1514, he wrote a great book called The Prince, all about the politics of hierarchies and authorities and chopping people's heads off. They don't chop your head off now, well, not in most Western countries, but you get fired. You get an office with no windows, maybe. There's nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all who profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all who would profit by the new order. It arises partly from the fear of the adversaries who have the law and tradition in their favor, and partly from the incredibility of mankind, person-kind, humankind, who do not truly believe in anything new until they have an actual experience of it. Remember I said, if you want people to actually engage with the changes, make them experience it, engage them in the design of it and implementation. Now this is really the essence of this particular presentation. Organizations are usually defined in terms of their economic performance. So every time you go home and you talk about your company, when you talk about it publicly, not privately, publicly, if somebody said in a public domain, well, where do you work? Oh, I work for the Royal Bank. Oh, what do you do? That's the next question. Vice President of Loans for commercial loans, or Vice President of Mortgages, or direct, whatever it happens to be. And in the Greater Toronto area or New York or whatever it happens to be, that's my area. You say to them, oh, how many people do you have in your organization? I have about 30 people report to me, and I'm a vice president, and I've got 4 directors and 5 or 6 managers or whatever it happens to be. And that's the economic organization. Oh, so it's the Royal Bank. What's your revenues per year? 10 trillion. How is it organized? Well, we have our commercial loans, our residential loans, our investment banking aspects, and all this kind of a thing. I'm not from the banking industry. I shouldn't have used that as an example, but the principle. See, it's the physical organization that they actually show on charts. So you got your skills and knowledge, what you do, what your colleagues do, what their skills are. I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm an electrical engineer, I'm a civil engineer. I specialize in hydraulics, and the other one, I specialize in composite materials, advanced plastic structures, and so on. And then it's who you report to, the organizational structure. My boss is this, and I have 5 people reporting to me, and they have 10 people reporting to them, and so on. Here's the business processes. First we have conceptual design, preliminary detail, all the stuff that's well documented. And this is our strategic plan. It's always every year, even if it's a publicly traded company, you'll always get the yearbook that shows you the shareholders, and it shows you the money that's paid to the executives, it shows you the share price, it shows you the plans that the company has. It's sort of a simplified, abbreviated version of the actual business plan. And under that also people ask you, what's the history of the company was formed in 1948 in Dayton, Ohio, or whatever, and it has plants across the world. And this is the resources that we use. There's so many plants we have. And this is the environment, how we impact our internal environment, the culture itself, and also how we impact maybe the external environment. We're a polluter, or we're not a polluter, or we've got relationships with the government with respect to green energy and so on. This is the visible system. This is what everybody, the economic organization. Now, there's the shadow organization. Now, this is what you're living every day. This is the stuff that's the unwritten rules. This is what's not talked about. In fact, this is the world of political incorrectness. If people were to say what they really felt, they might get fired. They might be in deep trouble. This is the stuff you say to your very closest family members or friends in your very private places, and you hope you're not being taped. Because if you are, you could finish up on TV for some kind of controversy or fired. And this goes on all the time. This is the shadow organization, the hidden, but this is the organization. And this is where the real feelings of the people and their motivations get expressed. People come to work to have their personal needs fulfilled. They come to work to do as well as they can for the economic organization, to make revenue and so on. But underneath it, they have their own personal needs fulfillment. And you'll know, because the conversation, if you sit in any restaurant, you shouldn't be eavesdropping, but if you happen to, 80% of the conversations are about people's personal careers. And it's about these issues, these shadow organizational issues. Oh, this guy did this to me. I'm having a hard time today. The government inspector came in today into our school, totally weren't even prepared for it. I had 15 children and they were studying, they were watching me. The stress was horrendous. Oh, I'm fed up with all this. This is the shadow organization. This is the stuff where the real people's stress levels go through the roof. They bring it home, bring it to their own families at home. It's where the attitudes and behaviors gets expressed and fixed. It's where the politics and the unwritten rules are expressed. You know, who has the real influence, who has the power, who's undermining who's sabotaging who. When you're a master change agent and are transforming the company, you've got to get in touch with all this stuff. This is where the action is. This is the easy stuff. Because it's all written in your books, it's written in your business plans, put on the walls, for God's sake. But this one is not, nobody goes and talks about the hidden political, who has the real power. Maybe the COO has the power on the chart, on the organizational chart here. But maybe it's a vice president that reports to that who has some kind of connection to the boardroom or some kind of connection to the CEO that has more influence. It goes on all the time. This CEO could be the father of a son or daughter, 2 levels below the COO, and that daughter or son could be being groomed for the COO position. I mean, this goes on all the time, and it's not that, it's the real world. It is a fact. It is a fact, and you've got to accept it, and you've got to work with it and understand it as a master change agent. You've got to make sure that there's not little camps forming. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've seen camps around family members form. Maybe the CEO and a family member who's a vice president is on one side of the tribe, if you want to call it, and then the COO and maybe a few VPs on another. And you've got 2 camps forming. I've actually experienced it. And it was a family-run business. It eventually imploded. So get in touch with this stuff, the stuff that's talked at the water fountains. Now, I think I may have even mentioned this earlier. If not, we'll do it. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like the anthropology from module 2 that I covered, the social evolution of innovation, part of the dimensions of innovation. As individuals, at the very bottom, we want food and shelter. Then we're looking for safety and security. Then we're looking for social interaction. Nobody wants to live alone, be alone. It's a crisis actually in modern society for elderly people. We're development of the ego and the sense of self. You don't want to overdo this either. We'll become a narcissistic society. That's a big issue in modern times. And then self-actualization and growth. Most people who go get degrees and get professional degrees, particularly in careers, law, engineering, medicine, and so on, accounting, architecture, and there's veterinary surgeons, there's many others, but people like that are sort of self-actualizing. They're trying to go beyond just, making a living, right? They're following a career passion, and they can afford to, and they can, adjust to doing it because they'll have put many years of schooling into place, and those years of schooling are years of where there's no earnings. In fact, debt because of school fees. Now, why people resist change? The system is highly dynamic. Hold on. the wrong one. What you really want to do, what the solution to this matter here is to align the two systems, the economic system and the social system. Where processes in the economic and shadow are misaligned, people resist. You've got to align them. So what does this mean? When you have new business processes, a new organizational structure, include the people involved in it. Make sure that their aspirations, their feelings and all are aligned so their conversations at the water fountain are positive. So you want your influence there to be talked about at the water fountain in a positive way. That guy's actually, this thing's working. I was at a laboratory today to see how my new job's going to be, and it's actually wonderful. This is what you're trying to do. You're trying to align the shadow organization, the gossip behind the scenes, with the economic organization, which is really what you're changing. Now, you're also changing attitudes and minds as well. You're reaching the attitudes and minds, but that's a byproduct. This is where the real action is, where the physical changes in product development and process management and manufacturing systems are performed. But they're only performed and work well if the attitudes and behaviors and feelings and value system is aligned with them. Why? So reaction to change is complicated by the complex systems of relationships and social interactions in a group. That's the reason I gave you that module 2, social evolution from 135,000 years ago. Just to say, underneath everything is human nature. And you must accept it, you must adapt to human nature, and it's unpredictable. Most people are reasonably predictable, but you do not know. You do not know what you're going to waken up to the next day with some individuals. Things happen, things change. And so you've got to work with those changes. It can take one person in a team to poison that team toward the change, toward you. And you may not, the idea is to be able to, remember I talked about the sixth sense? The idea is to know about it ahead of time, using your own intuition and instinct so that you can ward it off, but you may not. It may hit you from, it's happened to me. I have been hit completely from left field. I remember in one incident, I was completely shocked at what an individual said about me to my face, talking about how they wanted to move forward and implement a whole system after I'd been 2.5 years helping them build their business processes. There was a saboteur in that group, and I knew about him, and I knew about the situation. But I thought it was sorted. I thought it was that this particular issue was solved and sorted, but it was not. And it came later with a backstab, and it was a mighty blow at the time. But it didn't do any damage to me, none whatsoever, but I misjudged it. I absolutely misjudged it. And yet I had the sixth sense when I first went in to know about this individual who actually wanted to bring in IBM, funny enough, and worked through for 2.5 years working with me to get things done. But when it came to implementing, it was setting up the system, the processes and the teams and the culture and the readiness. And then when the actual system implementation came, blocked myself, my colleague and myself from actually doing it. So that's when you're surprised. You actually think you know what is going on, but you cannot. People can turn on you very, very fast because of other external influences. So intuition is important, sixth sense is important, but you cannot know what's coming down the pipeline, so just be careful with that. Dysfunctional mechanisms to deal with anxiety, inward focus, paranoid, and scapegoat. Unfortunately, all these psychological illnesses, if you want to call them, are psychological dysfunctionalities, business psychological dysfunctionalities, delusion, aggression, and repression. This is going on all the time, especially in power structures and executive circles. It's not one big happy family. There's all kinds of shenanigans going on. You got to deal with it should you choose to work at C-level executives. Functional mechanisms to deal with the anxiety. Common purpose. It doesn't mean to say they all agree. Focus on the primary task. Legitimize concerns. Open communication. Mutual support. And I keep saying over and over again, as the master change agent, without the CEO's sponsorship, your history, especially in these dysfunctional, neurotic kind of cultures, because people will turn on you. If the power structures change, they'll drop you like a stone. It talks about illicit, violent, irrational, emotional. Violence happens, by the way, but of course, not in the world I've moved in, but maybe if you're working in big oil companies, it goes on all the time. People get thrown out of helicopters. You've heard of it. Breax. Go back and study Breax, the gold mining scam. Executives were thrown out of planes and stuff. It does go on. But 99.999% of the world, you'll be okay. I don't anticipate that happening. Acceptable behavior in the shadow organization is highly influenced by the rules of the system and the economic. This is the unwritten rules. The unwritten ones, you know, there's the written procedures in and there's the unwritten rules. In the shadow, broad experience is important. Job hopping. You know, job hopping might actually be respected. You know, bringing people in from the outside, they may not promote from it within. Pay is a function of resource controlled increases. That could have increased personal empire. I mean, you see rewards for in the investment banking industry, for God's sake. The short-term rewards, they don't care whether the companies survive. They strip the assets of the companies because there's money to be made fast, you see. And so if the rules and the policies that the government sets allows this openness with investment banking and so on, they'll look for short-term gains for the executives, for their executive bonuses. If there's no long-term measurement, there's been so much banking that has collapsed, and yet the executives in the banks were getting billions of dollars payout. I mean, it's crazy. But that's the way this dysfunctional reward system encouraged that behavior, that destructive behavior. So a society only gets the performance that it allows to, that the rules by which it allows them to operate. And if it allows short-term gain for short-term pain, for long-term pain, not short-term gain, which will cause long-term pain, then that's what's going to happen. Implementation means persuading individuals to choose to change. You can't tell them to change. So you've got to understand the known past. You have to know their reference point, their history, their rewards. You have to observe their behaviors. And you've got to know these unwritten rules. What really motivates this individual. So you may have an individual, so for example, was sent to another country by the CEO, a young person sent by the CEO of the parent company, and that young person is reporting to maybe a vice president and a COO of a branch. But that young person may undermine the authority of the local executives because they've got a connection right to the CEO. So these are unwritten rules, and of course that won't work if the CEO and that person's undermining the authority in his branch. The CEO, and a CEO allows it to happen, it'll be a dysfunctional relationship in the branch, in the other country. So you gotta get these unwritten rules. Unknown future ideas, concepts, unclear benefits. So this is your change agent here. That's supposed to be you, and you're questioning, what am I going to do? Well, you cannot rely on management by force. You got to know the past, and you have an unknown future. But the future vision helps you achieve the future. But these are the forces that you're going to be forced to deal with. There's a pressure to change. If the pressure to change is weak, if you have an executive that says to you, we've been doing this for 30 years, why should we change now? That's a weak reason to change. If you have an executive that says, oh, we've got to turn this place around, I got to slash 30% of the lead time out of the products because our competition in China or in Asia or wherever it happens to be, or in the United States, they're coming in to their products can be got to market a third of the time and half the price of ours. We're in trouble. We got to change. So here, if it's weak, you've got these columns are the resistance, active resistance, and passive resistance, and this is the attitude shown in each of these domains. So you actively resist, it's rebellion. If you have passive resistance, it's lip service. Oh yeah, I'll get it done, but they never do. It sits there and it sits there and the decision isn't made. And that's all because of a weak pressure to change. But let's look at the strong pressure to change. This is where the attitude is a conspiracy. The passive resistance is paranoia. They're afraid. They have to change, but they're afraid to actually move ahead because they're afraid of failing. They're afraid of the risk. So they put their heads in the sand and maybe even get sick, get ill. That's where a lot of illnesses come from. Or if there's active resistance, they sabotage it. They actually sabotage, stab you in the back, talk bad about you, try to undermine you, dig up dirt about you from the past. Because you're the master change agent, you're the ones coaching them through it, or dig up or sabotage their colleagues, or sabotage the system, or pull back, detach from it. So you go from active resistance is rebellion to subversion to sabotage. So when the pressure to change is weak, you can rebel. So we don't need to do this. Forget it. This is a waste of our time. You're taking me away from my real work. But when they know that the compelling reason, but they still don't want to do it, they don't care about the company, where the company is in 5 years, because they get their retirement this year and they don't want any upheaval, then they can try to sabotage it. So you have all these psychological states that you have to manage in different people. And this can all be happening simultaneously. You could have individuals in every one of these boxes. You got individuals seeking a power play, trying to get rid of him and I'll get at that position. The choice can be influenced by shifting the balance. So the idea, these are the ones that are resisting, and you want to get them to walk up here, bring the lever down for the change. So what you want to do is make the new process, the new change, appealing. So entice and reward. Remember we talked about early adopters? Remember the diffusion of innovation? And we talked about, there's always 15% of the people adopt pretty fast, and you have 15% the laggards. They may never adopt, by the way. So you want to get that early 15% identified and get them on board, and as they walk up, others start to follow. You can see it. You can see this happening as you convince them and work with them and work in teams and work the processes with them. Bringing out about change requires simple three-step approach. Work out what you want to do. So you have to know what results you want. Identify and engage influential people. It's one of the first things I did. Who's the influencers here? And it may not be the top management. It could be somebody in the corner who's been there 40 years, who's loved, who's like a godfather or mother. But there are individuals who have great influence, powerful influence, who are very respected and very loved. And you've got to figure out who they are and work with them on this. Obviously, it's manipulation. Let's make no bones about it. There's a lot of manipulation going on here, psychological and political and social manipulation. But you better know that it's all for the higher purpose. The end result better be for good. Can't be for you to manipulate money out of them just. There has to be an end result that's good for your client, or it's good for the company that you work in. There has to be that as a higher purpose. It can't be for your own self-aggrandizement or your own money in the bank, because you'll get a reputation. It will spread that you're a con man or a con woman or a con person. So, there has to be the morality and the ethical has to align with everything has to be aligned here, or it'll fracture. It'll break down somewhere. Doesn't matter if you're the president of a small family-owned business or you're the president of the country. If your own personal morality and ethics are not aligned with the activities that you're performing and doing, it will come imploding down. Somebody somewhere will spot it, will want to undermine you. That's why politics is a dirty business, and there's no question about it. And it gets dirtier by the year in these power structures. So you've got to know who are the influential people, and you've got to persuade those people to change. Working out what you want to do. I'll just give another section here. Change requires a new design, people who want it, and systems to make it permanent. So to participate in developing You design the preferred future, you mobilize the people, and then you sustain the systems. This impacts the level to which you can mobilize them, and encourage, and you limit the amount you can change. And it's a closed loop. You can't change too much too fast. Step at a time, piece at a time, a wave at a time. 17, 18 plants, one plant, and maybe another 2, and maybe over a 3-year period do the rest. And as you have one success after another, it's like a snowball, it builds momentum. And people, by the time you get to plant 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, people say, come on, help us. Achieving these requires a continuous balance between the ideal and the possible. So you've got strategic goals and you have the tactics. You've got a trade-off. What really I'm saying here is you've got to be flexible all the way through. You know, don't go about this like an engineering project where you know that you design this part of the house and then this part and you put this together and so on. It's a very scientific process, physical structure. When you're dealing with psychological and social structures and cultural structures and so on, you've got to maintain a lot of flexibility. Things change, priorities change, but hopefully the overall goal of transforming the business to capture market share or to sustain market share and sustain the competition or to improve quality doesn't change. But the methods, you might suddenly change the product mix, for example, because there's some new trend emerges. Focus on tools and approaches to mobilize people. So design the preferred future, new business process, new organization, new culture, and then this is the design tools. Mobilize stakeholder management, governance, and decision making. I think I've talked most of this. And you've got to design the jobs around these new futures and measures and rewards. This is the last section. Once the objective is understood, you've got to define who the key stakeholders are, who must implement changes, the way of working, who has power and authority, how will decisions be made, what are the relationships of key people. Powerful people can be identified by understanding power commodities. Let's get real. The person with the money is the person who has great power. All you have to do is look at the political parties. Any country, by the way, not just the United States or Britain or Canada. The political parties are funded by interest groups, and those with the biggest money have the biggest influence. So if you have oil lobbies or the military-industrial complex, etc., they're going to have enormous amounts of power on the politicians and on the political parties. The power they have is enormous. So policies that the government sets are often shaped by the external enterprises, not by the governments themselves. And it's the same in enterprises. People who have the power to dole out the money, people who have the money have the power to dole out the money, etc. So what this means, commodities are scarce resources, desirable and subject to discretionary allocation. Change nearly always redistributes commodities, the power, which with drive from the gain for gain weaker than resistance to lose. So there's the resistance of loss is a much more powerful pull than the drive to gain it. People don't want to let go what they have. And that's one of the big difficulties in governing a country. If you give people welfare checks for disabilities and so on, and suddenly 2% of the population had this particular disability, and it was able to be funded, but suddenly this particular disability then 40% of the population has it, so there should be welfare handouts, but if you do that, you bankrupt the country. The people don't care about bankrupting the country. People care about losing that benefit that they have, that commodity. And there will be an uproar if you try to take it away. When you give things out, it's very, very difficult to take it back. It's very hard. So when people have a power structure, have a little domain, have an organization they run, have their routines and their domain, you are in trouble when you try to undermine that, and you will have enormous resistance. So you have to understand that. What are the commodities? Is it just power the person has, or is it money? Is it the ability to work for 5 hours a day instead of 8 hours because they're in a remote location? Or whatever it happens to be. There's many, many ways to understand what these commodities are. Typical commodities: scarce resources, people are scarce, space, capital, budgets, personal development, training, visits, so on. Personal comfort, salaries, perks, size of the office, lots of holidays, walk to the office, maybe be able to work at home most of the time because you're not under any scrutiny. Influence, membership of committees, access to information, decisions, access to powerful people, access to a local club, access to the golf course. Whatever the perk is, people do not want to lose it. The brokers who control the allocation of these commodities wield the power. There's the broker. And if your behavior is negative, you get black marks against you. Take away the commodity. Or you get brownie points, add the commodity. So people, you've got to figure out, these are the official rules and the unofficial rules. So these are the official rules of the company and the unofficial rules. And this broker here, you've got to know what's going on. You've got to know who these people are and how these rewards and recognitions are given out. And what motivates them. Because if you're going to change these behaviors, you've got to understand this dynamic. For a manager to implement a capital project in the organization below, all directors except the chief executive must be consulted as they control a key resource. Commodities required to justify and implement a capital project: capital, budget, space, contract income, information, and people. This is the control and this is the influence. So these are the brokers: chief executive, VP finance, VP marketing, engineering, VP. So the capital here, the finance has the biggest influence here. The budget, the VP finance has the biggest influence. Information and people issues, the VP operation has big influence. So those who influence the decision makers and implementers are the key stakeholders. Who asks for advice? Who trusts who? You got to know all this stuff. Who regularly talks to who? Where's all the gossip? Where's the real decision making going to happen? I'm going to show you a couple of diagrams and then I'll wrap up with this one. So this is a diagram of, this team is a re-engineering team. This is consultant. This is Mr. X. Call him the sponsor of the chief executive. So the chief executive is for the marketing change. And the marketing director is for the change, and a very strong influence with the chief executive, who is very tied to the consultant who's helping. And this executive here who's working with the engineering team, that's the project director. Very strong influence. Now you have this, the rest of the organization, you have a whole bunch of engineers, aerospace, whatever, that are absolutely against this new product development process because it's going to undermine their work practices. Now there's an individual here, this Mr. Z, Mrs. Z, who has very powerful influence in the company. Perhaps has been in the company a long time, perhaps may even be a family member of the company, and has big influence with the manufacturing directors and pulling that manufacturing directors on the fence. This is the level of involvement. CEO is not too involved, you see. He's more delegating, the re-engineering team's making all the change. So from here, you see, to the left, this is where they're all for the change. For here to the right, they're against the change. And this engineering team here, they're not heavily involved, but they're sort of sitting on the fence. But this individual here is trying to block this relationship between this process director, who's got a strong relationship with a manufacturing director. So this person's pulling this manufacturing director that way, who's influencing that person to pull away. Now the CEO obviously is supposed to have ultimate authority, but you don't know because it could be a family-owned business. But the bottom line is, unfortunately, if you want to make this work, you may have to remove this executive Z. You've got to work how that gets done, but once specific actions can then be taken to build support and achieve consensus. It's incredible how the whole thing just changes once you remove a blocker. And I'll have other lectures on the different roles, blockers and supporters and advisors, all the different roles of change management. But once you move that, the dynamics completely change. So I'll show you that again. This is the tension tending to pull away from the change here, the new product development process, the new ERP system. And this is the dynamic, and that they're all pulled in the right direction. So eventually they all, maybe I should have another diagram. It shows all of these on the for the change, but they're not going anywhere because there's no blocker any longer, because you've moved Z, Mr. Z. I've seen this happen all the time, by the way. So stakeholder mapping, I actually used to create these, not in small companies, but in large companies where you had senior executives and multi-divisions, aerospace companies, you'd create a stakeholder map to see who, for your own clarity, who has influence on who and how to actually, get the job done. Each person thinks of a particular issue that you're currently trying to pursue. Each table, select one issue to work through, create stakeholder map, identify scarce resources, identify who makes decisions. Look, a lot of us do this in our heads instinctively, but you can write it down to maybe communicate with your colleagues. 3 broad strategies for key stakeholder involvement: consult them, involve them, put them in charge. The best way to overcome a resistor is to put them in charge of it. But again, you've got to play the game properly. You can't just be playing mental games with them and psychological games. There has to be a sensible reason for it, that they have the skills, that they're with the company for the long term, that they're supported, and that they just need to get with the program. 2-way exercise, consult, understand a legitimate concern, build personal value proposition. Everybody wants to know what's in it for them. And I talk about that in detail in APS 1013. Okay, I'll finish up with these 3 slides here. Control the role and the behavior of those you put in charge. Be clear who you have, where, and how. Give accountability, get power resources, do conflict resolution. Again, I teach all this in APS 1013, actual conflict resolution techniques when there's conflict, and there will be conflict because of these power matters. Build ownership, between the teams and the business goals. Provide guidance in decision making. Stakeholder engagement, determine, you can do it. Actually, why don't you, in your discussions, write about some experiences you have with this stuff? It'll be fun, especially those with work experience. You cannot not have had this experience in the workplace with about 2 years experience. It's impossible, especially if you're a professional engineer of some kind working on a project with other teams. It's impossible not to have been exposed to this stuff. So define the decision-making process. What will be the key issues? Who must resolve the conflict? What forum can be used? How can we escalate on resolved problems? How do we wish to participate? Who influences the organization? Write a discussion about that. In APS 1013, I talk about persuading people how to change, and I talk about the social political games that are played and how you overcome them. Thanks very much. That's the end of Module 9.